I had this kind of romantic idea, having just left London, that I wanted lavender and rosemary, which are the two things I absolutely hate, heavy clay soil, which we have at Perch Hill. I put 10 tons of grit into this garden, and of course, whatever I planted in here just grew like topsy. It was fantastic. I'm Sarah Raven, and I'm walking through the Oast Garden at Perch Hill, which is my garden in East Sussex. And we've been here 31 years yesterday, actually. And I've made a garden over those 3 and a bit decades that wasn't here at all. So there was nothing here when we came here. And it's evolved to supply my teaching and my writing. And I have a mail order company where we sell bulbs and plants and lots of nice things for gardens. But really it's an experimental trial ground where I play with colour, I play with plant combinations, I grow lots of things in containers, and I grow lots of things for cutting and for eating. I'm standing in what we call the Oast Garden because it's a garden that sits between the farmhouse and the Oast. And when we first arrived here 3 decades ago, this was actually the car park, and so you drove in around the back of there and you parked here and you walked into the farmhouse. But I realised one day when it was really windy that it was actually incredibly sheltered already because of that huge oak tree. And then by just building that wall with what's called a hovel in Sussex, which is an open-fronted barn, and by building this wall from reclaimed bricks from around the site, we created this wonderful courtyard garden. And I had this kind of romantic idea, having just left London, that I wanted lavender and rosemary, which are the two things I absolutely hate, heavy clay soil, which we have at Perch Hill. But what I did is I dug out some of the clay, having scraped to the side, the topsoil, put in loads of grit. I put 10 tons of grit into this garden and rotivated it in with the topsoil. And so I had a sheltered, sunny, really fantastic, rich soil, but with good drainage. And of course, whatever I planted in here just grew like topsy. It was fantastic. And that is the basis of this garden now, which I wanted to be really, really strong colour, as it still is, with no white and no pastels. So really saturated colours, acid greens, purples, oranges. And it's still like that. So 30 years ago I made this garden and it's remained much the same. And what I'm doing just today is doing a bit of light deadheading, because when tulips go over, you don't want the energy to go into seed formation. You want it to bulk up the bulb, but you don't want to cut it right to the ground because you want the leaves to photosynthesize. So I'm just cutting the deadheads off the bulbs, and there are a few residual lovely ballerinas, which is one of my favourite tulips for picking because it's scented of freesias. So I'm just going to pick one of those for my bedside because it just smells absolutely delicious. And otherwise there's a tiny bit of weeding, but it really looks after itself. The great thing about spring flowering bulbs is that they are the best carrier of the colour baton all the way through, from really mid to end of February with Iris reticulatus until certainly the end of June really with the alliums. And I think of it like a relay race between the bulbs. And so the Iris reticulatus hand the colour baton in their relay straight onto the early narcissus, that hand them on to the tulips, that then hand them on to the alliums. And so you never get a colour dip from the middle of February till right the way into the summer, and then it's picked up by the dahlias. So they're just the best bulbs for a garden like this. I wanted to show you and tell you about my favourite tulip, which is this variety called Don Pedro, and it's got such a lovely story for such a beautiful tulip. It's part of the breeder group, and they were used in the early 20th century to do what its name says, which is breed other tulips. So things like our Triumphs and the single cottage lates and all those varieties originally come from this breeder group. And they just apparently produce lots of pollen and they're easy to breed. And they've gone out of fashion now because they don't produce as many bulbils as modern hybrids. But they're incredibly beautiful and they come in these rich exotic colours. And if you just look at Don Pedro, if you reflex the petals, it's like kind of mahogany silk. It's the most beautiful thing. And you just don't have modern day tulips on the whole with that variety, but you do have Don Pedro. And what happened is I went to Hortus Bulborum about 20 years ago, and that's this amazing place in Holland, which is a bulb library. And like a seed library, they preserve a few bulbs of each of the historical varieties, and every year they can just only grow out a small proportion, and they happen to be growing out Don Pedro that year, and I just fell on it and have been working with various breeders in the Netherlands for kind of 2 decades since to bulk it up. But because it's slow, there still aren't that many available, but it's just wonderful. It's late, it's scented, it cuts amazingly, and it's just so unusual. And that's the basis of kind of everything we do at Perch Hill, really, is we're trying to look for unique things that are really good value garden plants, hopefully incredibly perennial. And I haven't grown Don Pedro here for long enough to know about that. But yeah, that's what we do, is we test, we spread the net wide, bring them back here from lots of places around the world and in the UK, test them here, and then if we love them, we release them. I'm in a different part of the garden now. This is the Farmhouse Garden, and well, that's because it's on the south face of the farmhouse. And this is a whole different palette. It's the soft cool palette, which is kind of silver, mauve, based on white, but nothing saturated, nothing really, really strong in colour. And the reason that I chose that palette in this garden is because it rolls out into the view. And so I just sort of feel from the house, you look out of the windows or you're sitting out here, and it's really nice because you've got these very gentle colours that then roll out into the fields, whether they're covered with dew and frost and then up into the sky. It just works tonally, whereas if it was really strong colour in here, for me it would jar in the view. And so I love that gradual gradation from the garden kind of into nature, really. At this time of year, before the big annual changeover when the bulbs are finished and we move on to half-hardy annuals in pots, there isn't that much to do really. But one thing we do is we deadhead our bulbs in the pots. And the way to do that is just literally to cut down to the first leaf on the stem. So I've just literally cut that off, and that's because I don't want the energy of the bulb to go into forming seed. And it just makes it look a bit tidier, basically. And this is a classic bulb lasagna that was designed with succession in mind. And so this has actually got 3 different varieties of tulip in it. And the first one is a really beautiful pale mauve, which is called Silver Cloud, and that flowers from the beginning of April. And then this one comes next, which is called White Heart, and it's beginning to go over now, but it's just about holding okay. And then you'll see tucked in underneath is a really amazing, I'm going to pick one actually just to show you because it's a bit tucked in, but it's rather incredible. It's like a sort of peony. It's called Double Surprise, multi-headed, very double. And I love this in bud, and it holds its bud and then its flowers for longer than almost any tulip. So this flowers from kind of mid-April until mid-May, which of course is where we are now, or approaching. So you've got Silver Cloud for early in the season, then White Heart to carry us through, along with this one, which carries us right the way through until the middle of May. And crucially here, we've also got a pot topper. And we've done huge amounts of experimenting with pot toppers here, because what we've found is that they really keep the grey squirrels off our bulbs underneath. And so as soon as we put our bulb lasagna in with about that much compost between each layer of bulbs in the pot, we then top the pot, so i.e. the name pot topper, with a hardy annual or a biennial seedling. This one's called Dorcas Dara Purple Kisses, and it's got beautiful crimson umbella flowers. In about 2 weeks' time, you can see it's budding up here. So the bulbs come first that cover March into April, April into May, then the pot topper comes April into May and even into June. And obviously by that stage we clean the whole pot out and we start again with half-hardy annuals. But with all of them, they are picking up on the theme of everything around. So we have very calm, cool colours in the pots as well as in the surroundings, and that's what works best, and that is the theme of this garden. I'm standing in the cutting garden now, which to me is sort of the heart of the garden, because it's the first thing that I started with when I came to Perch Hill. I started growing cut flowers to supply a florist that I had temporarily in London, and it's still absolutely at the heart of what I do. I completely love it. And we divide here the big cutting garden into annuals, which is this end, and perennials, which is the other end, and obviously bulbs. So we're coming to the end of the bulb season now, but you can see, I mean, they're very gentle vintage sepia colours, which are so fashionable at the moment, and we love them here. So this was a trial cutting patch. We've picked lots, and when we pick, we're quite careful that we don't cut them right to the ground, particularly when they're not in pots but they're in the ground. We want them to flower for many, many years. And what we find is, one, it's down to variety, two, it's how you pick them, and a lot of florists will just pull the stem, the flower up by, like, yank it out like you would rhubarb. But that, of course, kills the bulb because it takes the centre, the core of the bulb out. So we don't do that. We cut trying to leave at least 2 leaves below the cut. They then photosynthesize, they supply starch back into the bulb to make them flower well the following year. And it makes them more perennial. And the final thing is, we actually tend to put quite a lot of grit where we grow them. Again, quite counterintuitive, and quite a lot of books tell you to feed your tulips as they're coming up, feed them again as they go down. We find that actually decreases perenniality, because if they're hungry, they actually will start to produce bulbils, and that means you get babies and that they are naturalising. So you then get this really good succession rolling from the bulbs to the hardy annuals, to the half hardy annuals, to the dahlias, and that carries you through from the middle of March till really certainly the end of October, even into November, with loads of cut and come again things for picking. And that's at the heart of all the cutting garden areas here.